So welcome everybody to our session on open science education. I'm here with Tamara Heck, and Verena Weimar from DIPF. It's the Leipzig Institute for Research and Information in Education. And I'm Guido Scherb. I work for ZBW. The long title is Leibniz Information Center for Economics. So today we would like to invite you to talk about open science education or teaching or educating open science. We think it's still a very important topic to do this, and we have a lot of target groups that we can address, but today we would like to try to give a specific focus on early career researchers, because we think that is a very important point when starting a researcher's career, to get in contact with open science, to not only to get the knowledge about how to do open science, but also to get an idea, what is the idea behind open science? So how do I get motivated to do open science? And this session is divided into two parts. So we start with 3 impulse statements. They have bad and good news for you. The bad news is that Julia unfortunately is sick. The good news, she did a recording. So we will play the recording of the talk, and then we have Maura Burke and Helen Clare here for the other impulse statement. Then we move to a more interactive part. It was initially planned in a World Café style. We changed the format a bit, but you will see how it works. We use, of course, Slido, and I give you a second to note the number or make a photo of the slide. So we use Slido for the Q&A session after the impulse statements, and we also use Slido here in the interactive part, but for now we only have to note the code. But of course you can also raise your hand and ask questions here on site. It's mainly for the online audience. Okay, I think 5, 3, 2, 1, everybody got it. Okay, then, I welcome Julia, who is unfortunately not here. She's not here. She's talking about towards effective open science education. Julia is an expert in teaching and learning of open science, ethics and integrity, as well in social technologies. She now also tries to foster open science practices at the Kiel University. So we have a role of so-called open science ambassador. And she accompanies the European science movement at Miller International Knowledge. Yes, and she will give us a more general perspective on open science education. And I now ask the technique to press the play button. Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much, Guido, for inviting me to the session on open science education. I was very honored when you asked me, and I'm very sorry that I'm not there in person. So my family got corona 2 days ago, and so I'm still in Kiel, and you are all in Berlin, and I'm really very sad that I cannot see you face to face. So the next 10 minutes, I will give you an overview of open science education in general. I will pick out some perspectives, because 10 minutes is not much, and I hope that these perspectives are interesting for you. So let's start. Open science education in general, we could say that there's really a great need of trainings and also informal learning, as we can see with 2 studies I want to pinpoint. So the first study is actually from Germany, and it's on data stewards, and it says it is estimated that up to 500,000 data stewards will be needed for the European Open Science Cloud alone in the next few years. In other words, people who will take over research data management in institutions, research networks, and projects. So this really states the big need we have, and one tool we have is capacity building via education. Another study, which actually comes from my team, which was published this year, is concentrating on the knowledge and skills of master students and PhD students, and it says there, before fair training, 81.1% of students suggested scientific actions that are not in line with the fair guiding principles. So to turn it around, only 19% of the students knew what actions in line with fair principles are, and it shows us that fair training is very, very much needed. However, most of the time when we look at formal training like classroom or hybrid or online training, we concentrate on the knowledge base. This is necessary because in open science, actually, the knowledge is not as far as we want it to be. However, there are also two other things we have to take into account, and the other thing is skills and attitudes. Why? Because the learning should be about what open science practices we know, so knowledge, but also about what we can do. This is the skills, the empowerment, the enablement, and third, what we want to do in research. So this is the motivation and the attitude and mindset. All three are very important, and we have to take that into the future to design actually formal training which covers all three aspects. So let me first run you through the work which was done inside EOSC Association via the educational task forces. So we have actually 4 papers out which are now publicly available, which you can have a look at. So first we have the recommendations for data stewardship skills, training and curricula, which was done by the Data Stewardship Task Force. Here you have a collection and also examples on data stewardship training. Second, we have a report on different activities and impacts of the EOSC Association. This is more than an engagement, paper on engagement, which covers more informal learning. Informal learning in a sense of, okay, we learn not only in classrooms and in online classrooms, however, we also learn in being in action with somebody. So this one is very much on the engagement strategies you can have as an organization or as a group with EOSC. The third one is also on engagement strategies, and it's a very general one because here the co-chairs of the 4 educational task forces came together and actually described their experiences and how organizations can engage with EOSC. And the fourth one, which is very important, and we all know because this is the incentive we all need to push and foster open science as the normal, is on research assessment. So we had one task force on research assessment, which describes in their report how to go forward with this topic and how to combine it with the COARA movement. So, however, when we look very closely into formal training, like classroom training, then we see, okay, what are we, the first question is, okay, what are we talking about? Because open science education, when you look closely, you realize, oh, okay, there are many, many different target groups which are in need of training. So we have here this wonderful circle, which actually spells out 12 different target groups, which all need specific training and tailored training so that open science as a practice can become the normal. So first, we all know them, because we do it for them, is the researchers, but we also have the university students because they're the future researchers. We also have citizens when we think about citizen science and the engagement of citizens in research. We also have in the fourth group, policymakers. As you all know, the policymakers are an important group which can support and foster open science. We have data curators, data stewards, open science educators and trainers. This is the meta level then, which is right now established. We have data research infrastructure support professionals, research software engineers, also data scientists and analysts, and Yes, enablers and organizations which open their doors for open science practices and the support for that. And in the 12th group, yeah, we collect everything which is not yet named, but however, somehow in the process of fostering open science. So as you can see, when we talk about open science education, yeah, we talk about many different things, which all actually try to support one goal. So we do not begin from zero, as we already saw in the reports and publications of EOSC Association. When we look around, we can find actually available open resources, which are trainings. And so I just picked two of them as an example. So we have here a training on open science policy checklist for research funding organizations. And as you can see, this doesn't target researchers, but it targets research funding organizations, and it's a very important tool. Another one which I brought along is a very typical training, which we relate to open science practices very easily, and that one is on sensitive data in the humanities and social sciences, and can be used by everybody who is interested to give such trainings. You can find these different trainings on the newly established EUNote. They were transferred there. However, there are also other different places. I think Helen will deep into that a bit, where you can find other trainings which are already on open science practices from these different angles for the different target groups. I also wanted to point out the Open Science Learning Gate, which is actually a place where a trainer can communicate their knowledge about their training and share it with other trainers. So how does it work? The Open Science Learning Gate is a service which tries to build standards, but not by its own, but via the trainers which are active in Europe and beyond Europe. As you can see, it uses actually target-specific training and also target-specific standard building, and it tries to ensure research integrity, research ethics, and the ethics of AI as an overarching umbrella through the training, so that we then in a few years have really a capacity of people from these different target groups which are able to put the new normal into a normal which is open science. So how does it work? It's very easy. You go to this questionnaire, which is the service when you are a trainer, and then you actually give insight into your standards, which you use in your open science training for your specific target group, and then you get a mirroring of the standards other trainers gave into the service, so that you can compare your own training with the others and decide if there is a need for amendment or optimization. You can also leave your email address so that you will get informed over the next few years of newly standards which come into the gate via other trainers, and you can also batch your training if you like. So this was a very fast overview of open science education in general and what the movements are right now in Europe. I hope, yes, it was fitting for your purpose. And yes, if you're interested in any of the things I just described, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to get into contact with the trainers and the open science educators in Europe. Thank you very much and have a nice meeting.
Can you please applause again? We want to record it. And we send it back to Julia. Yeah, okay. Okay. So we will send it to Julia and hope she will use it to recover better. Yeah. Okay, great. So our next speaker, welcome from the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I think you all know, it's Maura Burg. Maurer is a PhD candidate in the philosophy of science working at the Freudenthal Institute of Utrecht University. She's, I would say, an open science enthusiast in many facets. And for example, it's interesting, she worked as editor-in-chief for the Journal of Trial and Error, where they also have an own Trial and Error Award. And she's very active in different roles to advance open science in the Utrecht University. And yeah, I'm happy that you are here. And now the floor is yours. Okay, next. Okay, yes.
Okay, let me get my timer set because I can ramble on really easily. Well, thank you for the emphasis on my love for open science in the introduction, because I want you all to remember that as I present what I'm going to present today. So I think Guido invited me here under the guise that I was going to offer concrete examples of how we can support early career researchers. And to some extent, my kind of mere existence is a consequence of the ways in which Utrecht University specifically has adopted, closer? Yeah? Ooh, it's loud. How we've adopted open science policies kind of robustly, because I am a quote-unquote open science PhD candidate. I have a diverse set of responsibilities that are in line with the ways that we try to align recognition rewards with diverse career opportunities, and I'm obviously given quite a lot of freedom, and I'm kind of liberated from these traditional structures. But that doesn't off the cuff sound like open science, and that's kind of exactly what I want to drive home today when I'm looking at what open science education is. So I think, by and large, this is quite reflective of what we try to do at Utrecht University. We try to look on the one hand at kind of method. And this is okay, what kind of specific skills might my student need to have a successful career after university? These are, do we introduce standalone classes titled "This is Open Science"? Do we try to find ways that we can just introduce open science learning concepts into already existent courses? And this is very, very targeted on just looking at pragmatic, effective methodological approaches to integrating open science approaches to traditional didactic practices. There's also the other aspect at Utrecht, which is our kind of philosophy. We have a goal to cultivate an open attitude and an open mindset in our student body. And that's the kind of more ineffable aspect of open science and open science education that I'd like to look at today. It's really what is an open attitude? What does it mean that we have this group of students who are leaving our universities who in some way understand science to be something different than whatever it was before open science took over? And this is where, I'm a philosopher, right? So I have to go down to the core concepts. This is where I get kind of caught on what is education, right? I mean, we're kind of jumping the gun by saying what is open science education when I'm speaking to a room of people who I'm assuming are not primarily involved in didactic and pedagogical sciences. So what is education, and why do we teach, and what are the methods by which we try to impart wisdom and knowledge into our students? And by and large, there's really speaking very generally, two large different schools of thoughts inside of pedagogical sciences, which is on the one hand a more economic approach, which is that we identify that there is going to be an upcoming need of 500,000 jobs, and we need to have students who are ready to fill these jobs because there's downstream consequences of not having these students in place. There's another school of thought in pedagogical sciences that is kind of encapsulated in the liberal arts approach, which says, well, no, I'm not simply training students to get a specific job, but I'm taking on the responsibility of training the next generation of members of the world. It's not sufficient to just give them a set of skills. I have to create people. And that's the side of the story that I'm interested in, and the side of the story that I think open science could have the largest impact in. So if we want to create an open attitude of what, how, and why, what are even markers of success? I think it's so much easier for me to say that a marker of success is that 97% of my courses use open education resources, or I have hit a fair data quota, something of the sort. but what are the actual markers of success of creating students who are open in this way? And that brings me to a phrase that I think we see a lot inside of the open science community, which is open science is just science done right. This is, a slogan, and it's a useful slogan politically, pragmatically. If we understand it to be inside of that scope, that we're using it in negotiating with people who don't want to adopt open science at all, then I think it can have some sort of value. But on a deeper level, I think that this is just emphatically and completely the wrong way to understand open science. And that's why I'm very happy to be introduced as an open science enthusiast, because I'm not approaching this from a hostile angle. I'm approaching this from the perspective that I really, really cherish what open science gives us as an opportunity of researchers collectively. When I look at open science, what is it juxtaposed with, right? Closed science to some extent, but the extent to which this is given a robust taxonomy that can be identified as this is what I am counter to, I think not as much work has been done to address this point. So I turn to a sort of loose understanding of what is the scientific enterprise as a whole, if I want to create students who can robustly participate in this from an open perspective. And we have so many actors to take into consideration. There's university research, where a majority of the impacts of obviously specifically open education are going to be felt, but also specifically open science en general. But there's also, very importantly, primary and secondary education. That's where we start crafting the image of what a scientist is, what science is. Open science education can't be restricted to students when we get them at 18, or even worse when they're in their master's program, or even worse yet when they're in their PhD, and there's already so much dialogue around what science is supposed to be. There's really interesting approaches from the Scandinavian countries where they start with primary students, teaching them a different image of what science is, and we see that this gives them a lot more freedom as they navigate their future careers. There's industry, there's private research, pharmaceuticals, the involvement of the public, the patient. What's the difference? These are all unanswered sorts of questions outside of open science. So who is our enemy, and how do we make them more visible? Something that my discipline has to offer here is that this is all that we do. This is what philosophy of science does in particular, is we look at science as an object of study, not specific theories, but the actual nature of doing it. And the discourse that we have had for a long time is on values and norms and methods, having a very robust knowledge that these things do not come out of nowhere. They are not divine proclamations that we simply discover. They are things that people decide to do and things that people decide to take action on. What I see open science as is, for the first time, the scientific community as a whole is taking a moment of being meta-reflexive on our practices. We're, for the first time, kind of looking, what is peer review? When did it start? Why do we do it? Why have we been assuming that it works? Where did publishing come from? How did we find ourselves in this position where there's a monopoly of the most highly profitable companies in the world who are managing our education? How? Why? So I really, really deeply reject the notion that open science is just science done right. And I deeply reject this notion in developing educational criteria for our students. I don't want to be in a position in 10 years where open science is just science done right has become our only motto, and we have successfully implemented fair data principles, pre-registration, maintaining open lab notebooks into the learning goals of our students, and we lose sight of this I view, that we go back to the idea that in some sense we've cured the issues of science. We will not cure the issues of science. We have to create an attitude and a mindset in our students that is continually reflexive, because we are going to gamify anything that we do in open science, right? Scientists are not pure angels who have no individual needs or desires. They're economic actors, they're social actors. They have volition outside of just finding knowledge. So we have to maintain this bird's eye perspective if we want to successfully have achieved an open science revolution. So I present instead open science as applied philosophy of science, a moment of collective meta-analysis, conceptual clarification, historical investigation, and concept creation. And attached to this, I do have a list of perils and benefits that I think we can see. These slides will be available because I have 1 minute. But my primary takeaway, as you can see, is that I really think we need to be more invested in the philosophy element of the determination of learning goals for early career researchers if we want to successfully create a healthy scientific enterprise that is not going to fall back into the same sorts of issues that we're fighting against in the kind of quote-unquote mystery closed science that we're fighting against. So thank you very much for your time. You can find me associated with any of these things. I'm really, really welcome to conversations and emails.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now we can actually go to the last impulse statement by Helen Clare. She wrote in her CV, in her bio, that she has over 20 years experience working in training and staff development in the education sector. I think there's mostly nothing to add there. This is really impressive. So she's working in several European projects and currently co-leads the EOSC Opportunity Area Expert Group on skills, training, reward, recognition, and upscaling. And for example, she also co-chairs the open air community of practice of training coordinators. So I'm really looking forward to your talk, and welcome here in Berlin, and your floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't want to bend over for the whole talk, so leaning into that. So thank you. Oh, great. I was hoping to put my phone there, but it looks like it's going to slide off. Right, okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today and get to spend an hour talking about open science education, which is one of my favourite topics. As Guido mentioned, I have been involved in open science education for a number of years. Here's my slide. And my talk does build on the others. It's always good to go last so you can draw the connections together. So what I am going to do in terms of the emphasis today is shift it more towards where do you as trainers and teachers get your skills, because that is mostly where my experience lies. I don't do much teaching with any of early career researchers, but I teach and train those who do. So there are many, many resources out there which we'll discover, and I'm sure you've discovered. We're almost at a state there are too many open science resources out there. And most of these resources often they'll teach the subject, and you can learn about the knowledge and skills that we were talking about, but they don't necessarily teach you how to teach in those subjects. So that is what I want to focus on here today. Obviously, there are sessions like this you can come to, but where else can you go outside of this? And I think we've already discovered from the previous talks, a key issue is that open science itself is very broad in terms of the subjects that it covers, and also broad in terms of the ways that you can approach that subject, which I think we just saw very clear with Mara. So I've been involved in the open world for a long time. Before open research, it was open education. That was my first exposure to the open movement, then moved into open access and open publications, and then the last 5 or 6 years in open science. So I've been involved in a lot of activities, as Guido mentioned, including the Upskilling Countries Task Force that Julia mentioned at the start. And as I've already said, my career is mainly around supporting those who teach and train. But there are many communities involved in open science, as we'll see, and many perspectives to take. And I think this does link to Mara's talk. It's about considering what approach, what are you trying to get out of your education? What are you trying to achieve with your students? And I want to help you reflect on that, as well as give you some real practical resources that you can use in your own teaching and training, and communities that you can join. If anybody likes my picture, I was looking for a picture of paths and roads, couldn't find one, so I used one of my own that I took on Sunday evening. So I just want to start with the idea that the 5 schools of thought around open science by Fescher and Friedrich-Wilhelm. This is now 10 years old. I'm sure it could do with being looked at again, but I think it gives us a good starting point, and hopefully you can see some of the detail, but if not, I can share the key points. The idea is that there are different approaches to why you want to sort of develop your open science practices. And just to go around the 5, we start with the infrastructure school, which is very much looking at the platforms and services and tools that are needed to make research open. There's the public school, which is about making science available to all. That includes citizens. There's a measurement school, which is looking at open science as a method, as we've heard mentioned earlier, to look at different measures to reward the scientific endeavour. There's a democratic school, which thinks about democratizing access to knowledge, so giving an equal access to all in the knowledge process. So it's about inclusivity. And then we have the pragmatic school that is involved in making research more efficient and quicker, etc. And obviously, like any model, this is not simple. You don't come from one school and not the other. But I find it useful to think about these schools, and I think certainly there should be another school or schools around this approach looking at research integrity and quality and responsible research and how the role that open science fits in that. I find it useful to reflect on these because, as I said, it's too simplistic to say that you're in one, but I do very feel strongly. I've come mainly from the democratic school. I have a background in libraries, so knowledge to all is important, equally public. But I work for a technology company, so the infrastructure school is very much my background, focusing on data skills, etc. So that's the different approaches that you may take. I think we're all familiar with this model of UNESCO model of open science, looking at the different subjects. So there are many different activities involved in open science. So that just emphasizes the breadth and the complexity of open science and education, but also hopefully it helps you reflect between these two models on where you sit. You know, what are you trying to achieve, and which areas are you actually working on in terms of developing skills? So I want to spend the rest of the session really just talking about some different initiatives that you may know about. If not, then they are there available for you to explore after today. Some of these have resources, some of these have communities that you can join. The first is the Open Science Community of Practice of Training Coordinators, and this was originally set up by Open Air, one of the research e-infrastructures that you may have heard about. This has been going for about 6 years now, and there's over 100 members from different countries. It's a nice informal community. Disclosure, I am the co-chair of this, and we have monthly meetings, and we're a nice, friendly community. And essentially, we're just there to support each other and share activities, ideas. We have presentations once a month where we share practice. And there's a lot of project training coordinators, so you get a lot of people from EOSC projects who coordinate the training coming to this, and it's a really nice place because it's free from the restraints of project deliverables. We can coordinate, we can think about what is needed in our community. So do consider joining that. You can come along and just simply listen, take part, share. But we also have had in the past a series of activities where we work on shared tasks together. One, for example, we came up with some documentation around quality guidelines, some advice on GDPR in training when those regulations came in. And most recently, I say most recently, we've actually been working on this for a long time, but it finally got published last week, a joint paper on verification of resources. So if we want to practice open science while we're actually training and teaching, how can we make our open science, our resources available? So that has case studies from various members of the community. OpenAir, who are very supportive of the community, they also run a Train the Trainer bootcamp. And most of the details are on the slide there, so I won't say too much more. But again, what I would say, and equally with the previous community, I think most people are coming from the infrastructure school there, where we are focused quite a lot on data and practical skills, not exclusively, obviously, because you can't separate them out. So we also do cover topics like ethics, etc., when using data. And again, this boot camp, it does give you skills in research data management, ethics of using an AI, but it also does give you the skills to teach and train in these subjects. If you're interested in this, it's continued updated, so it does have topics such as open peer review and citizen science and AI. It's a week-long intensive boot camp. And the deadline for the next one is the 30th of October. So if you're interested, please do take a look at that. Most of the members from the previous community are involved in teaching on this. How am I doing for time? Could you give me a little... 1 minute. Okay, right. So in terms of other organisations, we've got the Fort, which is very much coming from the ECR point of view. So it's a voluntary organisation established a few years ago by PhD students. So we're talking about ECRs, training ECRs and building a community, a network of knowledge. And they very much do come from some of these other schools, looking very much at that integrity, social justice. And they're becoming increasingly influential, and they have so many resources on their website. So please do look. They have lesson plans. They have tutorials. They have all sorts of things. It's too many to go into here. And finally, I won't mention much about NERC because that has already been mentioned by Julia. But what I would just like to finish up with is just talking very briefly about a local initiative in the UK. And again, this has come from another direction. I've been working in open science training and skills for a long time in the UK around data and publications. But it's really the UK Reproducibility Network that's got the attention of the funders and has really got some traction because they're coming from the research perspective, looking at research integrity, research quality. And they managed to secure a reasonably good amount of funding for a open research training programme. So that's been running since 2021. It will run for 6 years. And they're very much focused on building a network, a grassroots network that is complemented and supported by institutional strategic leads. So the model they have is fantastic, but it means that the whole network is being run, the whole program is being co-created by researchers themselves, but it's not exclusive. Everybody in the institution can join, including this professional support staff. So it's really building this holistic support for open research training across the UK. Again, they have a lot of resources available on their website. But in terms of the messages that I just want to leave you with, these are some questions that you'll be discussing shortly, but I'd just like you to think about where you're coming from in terms of your school of thought, what are you trying to achieve, but also bear in mind that open science is huge. We can't do it alone. So please do look for other colleagues in your institution that you can collaborate with, that you can work with. So they may be in professional support, they may be embedded in faculties. So this is where the local networks, I think, can be really helpful. And that's really all I wanted to say. So.
Yeah, thank you very much for those wonderful impulse statements. So our speakers here now go to the stage, and while they are preparing with the microphones, I think we can switch to Slido here on the screen. And the question is, who has a question in the audience? First of all, raise your hands. Is there a question already here? Then I think we can start with the first question that was submitted to Slido. Okay. While I'm waiting. Okay, your micros are working?
I'm not sure. No.
Yeah, great. So the first question is quite interesting. I was also thinking about that. It's 1.17 million researchers in Europe and 500,000 data stewards. Why don't we just make researchers be all paid as data stewards, and how did you estimate that need? It goes a bit to Julia, I think, but also you maybe have an answer on that.
I think, is this working? Yep. I think the answer may come in one of the subsequent questions about the barriers to ECRs. This is time is a huge barrier and expertise. So for everyone to become an expert in data management is going to be challenging, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think this intermediary role is going to be vital, but others may disagree.
Do you want to add something, Maura?
No, I don't disagree. I mean, there's a lot of projections. We are in a time that the amount of knowledge we've produced collectively is so massive that you cannot simply expect everyone to be an expert in every niche area. The creation of these hyper niche positions is just a direct consequence of the volume of knowledge that we've now produced. So it's necessary.
Good, great. Thank you. Then, if any question in the audience, just raise your hand. No questions so far? I have a response. Oh, yeah, well, you have a response. Then that is good, quite direct.
I suspect that number, although you did provide a reference to a 2023 document, I think, in your talk, I suspect that document itself draws on a 2016 document around EOSC, which itself drew on other sources for that 500,000 number, which are, other people have criticised that. We did so in a report for the Wellcome Trust. That's the Digital Curation Centre where I'm from. It's not such a frightening number as it might be, but there's also some doubt about the methodology that was used to arrive at it. Okay, then thank you for that comment.
The next question is also quite interesting. It belongs a bit together. So the one question is, why do we usually see the main focus on, no, the one question that disappeared, I just had in mind. Okay, no problem. So should not be somehow the presented education resources connected to OER, Open Educational Resources Initiatives. There were also foster projects, of course. You could add them here.
Yeah, I struggle a little bit to interpret this question. Should not be somehow the presented educational resources connected to OER. I mean, if you go to the FORT initiative, for instance, a lot of the trainings that they offer there are OER. They're open materials. Also at Utrecht, a lot of the educational materials that we create on didactic training and methods are completely open. We have a lot of data stewards who ensure that we're not violating copyright in that message. So I'm not exactly sure the question or how to answer it. Yeah, you want to try?
Yes, I can give it a go. I think just to address the foster project, obviously that is another casualty of the project-based funding for these initiatives. So the project didn't carry on, and nor did the platform. However, the resources have not been lost. If you're not aware, those resources are now on the Open Air, Open Plato platform. I think the broader question is there around why can we not join up these resources? I think that's a huge problem that we know about, and certainly it's a big topic of discussion in the EOSC community because there are many, many projects and initiatives that all have training resources. So that's one of the focuses of the Opportunity Area 5 on skills and training, etc., that we would love to be able to have some kind of harmonisation. I don't think a central catalogue where everybody deposits their resources is going to work. So I think it's got to be some kind of distributed approach where we're all using the same metadata standards and hopefully some kind of harmonisation around resource description to make it easier to find resources. But that's my kind of ultimate dream, as I was talking with the colleague Jessica about that over breakfast this morning, strangely.
Okay, so now I found the question that raised my interest. This is, we try to move towards open science and fair through OERs, while these by themselves are rarely aligned with the same principles. How do we fix that challenge? Also the question is, do we have too few open learning resources that can be used for open science education?
Too few, I wouldn't necessarily say, but we have seen that a lot of the development of open education training materials have occurred in silos, let's say. So they're not really findable, they're not really interoperable, so that's a little bit of a kind of ironic failure. But it's also a little bit of the consequence that, yeah, we're trying to take locally developed knowledge and make it globally accessible on a really massive scale. So like Helen mentioned, one of the things that we're working on at Utrecht, for instance, is aligning metadata across the continent so that we don't run into this issue. But yeah, I see it. Is that a finger or a question? Yeah.
Okay, then if you want to answer that question too, then we have a question in the audience.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in my talk, before I got involved in open research, open access, etc., I was involved in open education. So I was involved in that community. And then I moved over into open science and found there was another community that was all talking about open education, but actually they weren't talking to the open education community. So over the last few years, I actually have taken some of my work to the OER conference, which happens every year, an international conference that happens in the UK. And I've been surprised how little overlap there is between the two communities. So I think that's one point. I think there needs to be much more learning across the two communities about the lessons learned from the OER community. But also this point about making OERs fair. I think that's what the question is getting at. There is a lot of work now around that. As I mentioned, that article that we've worked on recently, the Elixir research infrastructure's done a lot of work. They had their principles, 10 principles. They've got a fair cookbook for training materials. And also the Skills for EOSC project has recently produced a fair by design methodology. So there is work on this, but it does have some way to go. And again, partly I think that comes back to time and resource, because it's actually quite resource intensive to make materials fair.
Good, thank you. Then we have one question from the audience.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm a data steward and open science trainer from Sweden. And I'm, even if an open educational resource is fair, it's still difficult to reuse it sometimes. I mean, so even if there are many sources out there, do you have any specific tips on how do I reuse someone else's training material? Because I find that to be quite tricky.
Yeah, so I mean, there's the very technical side of interoperability, which I think is something that's a little bit easier to target if you have something like an EduSources or a cloud network where these things are findable at least. Okay, we've achieved quite a large chunk of this. But the difficult aspect is the translation of materials that necessarily doesn't capture the entire cognitive content of the person who developed it on the page. So it does still require quite a high level of cognitive engagement on the side of the user. I don't know if that's an escapable issue. I mean, I don't think we're in a position where we're saying that you're going to be able to open up a catalog and never have to create content yourself and just reuse it. You have to engage with it to make it usable for your audience and also to fill in the gaps that are always existent in the translation process from something in the mind to something in the page. So it might be, to fix that issue, kind of a communication problem of managing expectations of what are we doing here. You know, we're providing resources and examples that you can build upon and modify for your own case studies, but you can't just select from an existent catalog and not have to create there. You like to add?
Do you want to answer as well?
Yes.
Great.
I think, again, this issue has been a long-standing issue in the OER community. And certainly in the work that I've been doing around FAIR, I've been working actually on a paper which is not published and may never get published, but this makes me think we need to get it finally done, is that FAIR isn't enough. Like you say, and a lot of it comes back to your skills and your expertise as a trainer and as a teacher. Many of us in these roles didn't start out with that pedagogical sort of baseline, so there's part of that. But I think also, Maura's mentioned other points there around how easy it is to adapt materials. There's a sort of a paradox here that the more information, the more detailed resources are, often the less they are suitable for your circumstance. So, but there is also work, just to highlight if you're not aware, that the RDA has been developing minimal metadata standards around resource description. And that is very, very minimal. But they had some work, and I don't know what's happened to it, around extended metadata. So it does include more information about the resource to help the trainer who's reusing that resource. But again, I think you need to look at it's back to those who produce the materials. I can produce a presentation with bullet points, or I can produce a presentation with bullet points and full speaker's notes. The second takes much more time. But maybe AI can help us with this, I don't know. I've just thought of a use for AI.
AI can help everywhere, yeah. So we have time for one last question and quick answers. You have priority here. Okay, you were first. Sorry, but thanks for the question here.
I'm Larissa from Max Planck Society, and I find it quite refreshing that here we are talking about a more comprehensive understanding of open science, because the last 2 days here at the EOSC event, European Open Science Cloud, I felt like we were mostly talking about FAIR and research, data management. We are talking about data stewards. We are not really talking about open science as like a reflective activity of the whole scientific workflow about science in general. And I'm wondering now here in one of the last sessions, how do we get those people involved already in open science projects to actually understand it as something more than open access and research data management and outputs in general?
Yeah, I think this is really at its core, this is a sociological question. And a lot of the work that I did a few years ago, when we were still in the kind of early adapter phase, let's say, of open science, I don't know where we are, maybe critical mass, is looking at this question. Because there's a dialogue, there's a necessary dialogue whenever you're dealing with a situation where you have a proliferation of actors that you need in order to get your critical mass, who have different ends in and of themselves. So it's kind of a theory of political engagement and political proliferation that as more and more actors get involved in a certain political situation, then the message becomes diluted and you get more and more focus on easily quantifiable metrics that are indicative of success. This has a useful function. Pragmatically, it's very, very useful to be able to go into report meetings and say, look, I have identified trackable elements that you desire, and I can show an upward trend, and it's successful, please keep giving me money. I'm not saying this in a like passing the buck kind of way. This is a really critical function of organizing society. To remain in dialogue, to remain focused on kind of the principles that maybe got innovators or early starters interested in projects, it's an intentional practice, right? So you have to invite people who are interested in this. You have to facilitate these conversations because it doesn't come out of anywhere. And it's not a competition between the two sides. They're both very necessary aspects. And I think to some extent, just as a consequence of the way that critical mass works, more and more people will be specialists in things like RDM, things like data stewardship, and this is very important and it's very necessary. But you have to just intentionally keep a sort of balance. Otherwise, what I fear could be the consequence is that in 5 to 10 years, it's just something that we kind of do in the background because it's what's on the agenda of the university, and we've kind of lost our perspective in that way. So my answer is intentionality, I suppose.
Good, quick answer.
I think you have to look at EOSC and what its purpose is, and it very much comes from that infrastructure school. So it's trying to build the infrastructure. That's why the focus, firstly, the focus is on data, but there's increasingly a focus on publications, etc., and code. But you also have to look above that, because all the funding from EOSC has come from a particular infrastructure program within the EC. So other aspects of open science that maybe cover the integrity sides are being funded in other places under other programs, and I think there's a big issue about Join Up. I found out about a project just as it finished called Rosie, all about open science, and I had been working in European projects for 4 years on open science training, and I found out about it just as it finished. So there is a lack of Join Up again at that level as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So we now close the Q&A session, and now we go directly into the, I call it interactive part, and I hand over to Tamara. She will guide us now through the next part. So thank you for the exciting questions so far.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, now we will come to our World Cafe part. We wanted to do it on site in this room, but it's a bit too small, so we do it online. And the online audience can engage as well. We do it via Slido. And we want to know about your experiences and statements on several questions. You can use Slido, but we will collect if you agree, your statements here from the audience online. So Verena will do this, and we will collect all the statements and later write a report. So we come to the first part, and that was related to Julia's talk. And I start the first poll, and each poll has 2 questions. So we want to know from you, what challenges have you faced in open science education, for example, at your institution, at your university, and when does one need to start an open science education grassroots initiative? So we want to know the hands-on experiences. To give an example, so at my institution, we have agreed on an open science codex now. It's a paper about, 16 pages long, but now it's just a paper, and we are struggling, but we are discussing how to go on with the training, how to show the good practices. We started to collect material, but it was so overwhelming because it was so much. And we want to know about your experience and how you see the situation. Okay, there are first things coming in, but you can, as well, you can just raise your hands and give a statement here in the room. That's perfect as well. Okay, challenges discovering resources. I guess we heard this during the last 2 days. It is still challenging. Communication and networking, supportive resources. Maybe someone in the room has a concrete example, what she is doing, or how if they have a kind of, working group at the institution. There's one.
Thank you. It's Christian Schmidt from Heidelberg, German Cancer Research Center. Apart from being a project manager in an NFTI consortium, I'm also involved in training in a smaller scale infrastructure project that deals with bioimage data management and how to use a specific research data management platform. And I'm so enthusiastic about hearing your perspective here. For us, it was quite difficult to make the material that we present in a way that we think it is reusable. Exactly the question that came up. And we ended up in doing all the work twice, so to say. On the one hand, how it's used in-house, even producing little video productions of like only 5 minutes so that you can keep the engagement time and all of that. And then we made it all again in an open format with slides that are generic and so on and so forth. And reflecting back on this, I wonder how I wasn't aware of talking to other professionals in that area beforehand to have checked maybe how good and reusable that is. So would you recommend that? Can we sort of say, contact you? Who do I first contact to say, maybe if someone looks over the material before we even publish it, it can even be better?
I'm not aware of international efforts, but I can give you an example, at least in the Netherlands, of how we're managing this. We've identified this as a specific skill set of like having an eye that can see what is specific content and what's generalizable content. So we have a completely independent network in the Netherlands that's owned and operated by this third party called SURF, and they've created something for us called EduSources. And we have advisors in the universities where if you want to make something open, some materials, you send it to them and they do exactly this. They look at this and they say, okay, well on this slide, this is not that interoperable, maybe you look at this, so on and so forth. So there is the development of specific professionals in these domains offered through library services. I don't know if maybe there's a similar service available to you that you had no idea to look for, because most of the people I work with have no idea this is something that we offer. But yeah, a shortcut to this, if you have no pre-existing thing, and maybe Helen can tell of an international effort to do something similar, is of course having a kind of collaborative effort. It doesn't have to be someone who's open science oriented. You just show another professional the presentation and say, can you use this? Like, can you extract this or have them identify it? I mean, think didactically when you teach someone, what's the main feedback I always find giving someone? It's like, the content's in your head, it's not on the page. So having someone be able to see that, I think, is the biggest service that we offer along those lines.
Yeah, that's essentially also what we did, just a bunch of colleagues, everyone looking over it and testing it in use cases. Because the in-house, what we would have, there is a specific system that's very usable for training materials and for instructional material, but it has a vendor lock-in. It's a system that you buy, and we asked if I use that, can I export it in an open format and then publish it? And it's, oh no, we don't have the license for that. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So besides the technical issues, I saw specifically at Utrecht that you have this kind of established a community with like I saw it as advisors from different disciplines. I guess you can call them as researchers, for example, even to ask ad hoc questions. But sometimes that is what we experience that people, and we are not talking about PhD students only, we are talking about postdoc researchers, team coordinators. They don't want to do the training or 1 week courses, but they need ad hoc support. So do you have experience?
Yeah, so I'm the chair of the open science community at Utrecht, where we do try to operate as a kind of node, because we found that the kind of like the time for advocacy is kind of over. Everyone knows what it is. So we pay way more attention to doing these sorts of very targeted approaches to specific research groups, to specific laboratories, of identifying, okay, this is the issue that this group is having. Instead of setting together a 200-person event on some general topics, we're going to put this money into creating a 20-person workshop on addressing this issue, so that we then create local knowledge centers at each department that can then proliferate out through the community. So that is the kind of function that we serve. There is right now, for anyone who doesn't have an EOSC, which is an official, thing, there's impulse funding right now to start your own OSCs at your universities if you look at the International Open Science Community web pages, and they're highly advantageous for these sorts of issues. You do create this local construction of experts who have this oversight onto all of the silos and resources and blah, 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 that can facilitate the construction of these sorts of initiatives much more easily.
Could I just add to that? My first answer was going to be community, like we just said. And if you had a service like SERFs, I didn't know they had that. That's amazing. But another idea that I've thought, or it's been discussed in some of the communities that I've been involved in, is the idea of, if you come across a repro hack, so the idea that you take materials that have data that's been intended to be made reproducible, people sit and they test that. They sit down, they sit with the data and all the supporting documentation, and then they try to reuse that data and see how easy it is. And I always think that would be a really good idea to do that with training materials. Sort of have an event where people come along and they test each other's materials and try and see what issues come out of that. But I don't know what happened. I don't know if we ever actually ran an event in the end. I don't think so.
Thank you. A question to that, and as well asked from the online audience, is who's going to assume the role of the trainer? So how do you have any incentives for those people? Because you need the people doing the work, the reproducibility, the training, the support.
I think that's back to that fundamental issue of rewards and incentives. And certainly the fact that one of Fort's aims is to try and get teaching on the same status as research, but it's back to what you're incentivized to do. And I know certainly within the UK that UKRN program, the whole model is based on having individuals within the institutions who then agree to train a certain number of individuals. And they've struggled to recruit the number of trainers precisely for these reasons. So I don't think we've solved that one yet.
Okay.
I do have to speak quite highly of Utrecht as an institute in this domain. Utrecht saw very early on that achieving any kind of open science goal, if we didn't fundamentally adjust the ways that we approach recognition would lead to a complete failure. You can't convince someone to publish in a no-name open science journal if their career is still contingent on having a high level of publishing in Nature. So we really overhauled our career paths, our end of year exams that you do to see how you're doing, and also what we consider as the jobs of a researcher at the university, such that we have very, very diverse career profiles in something called a triple model. So it's teaching, research, impact, personal development, learning, and education. And these are all equal, and your profile can consist of any conglomeration of these elements. And that has meant that we do have a robust pool of people we can pull from when we need trainers or train the trainers. We have specific departments called lifelong learning, lifelong literacy, Center for Academic Training. So we really, really emphasized the development of these roles that you do get rewarded for are just what your hours go to. And that's something that I speak really, really highly on Utrecht as an organization for effectively implementing early on.
Okay, thank you very much. Any statement from the audience? Otherwise, I will close this poll and we go to the next. I just read that there was the challenge that of collaboration between the different communities and trainers. I guess that is one of the challenges. However, we have, for example, the institutional specialities, then we have regional communities, we have the disciplinary communities, and they all at best have to talk and collaborate. I guess that's one of the main challenge. So I close this poll and we come to the next one. So the two questions are, where do the early career researchers struggle most to fulfill good, call it good scientific practices, and how can we bring open science education into the PhD studies? So I know there are a lot of differences within Europe or internationally. There are PhD studies with specific courses. I know PhDs with just write their PhDs and do not have any applicational courses. So what is your experience? Okay, first one is the mandatory curricula. Okay, that's maybe the question from there's a question or statement.
Observation not just on this, but in general, I think about all of the discussion we're having about how to give people skills and competencies, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do here. We want people to either, whether it's acquiring a philosophy or whether it's acquiring quite a practical skill. But we keep coming back to this talking about training and curricula, and that's one way to acquire a skill or competency, but I think all of us are aware that there are quite a lot of things we've learned how to do where it wasn't because we went on a training course about it. It was because we learned from a mentor or from a colleague, or we used some other mechanism to do that. And I think it's important to remind ourselves all the time that when we're thinking about this, giving people extra skills, that there are lots of different ways to get those skills, and training is just one component, an important component, but not the only one.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess it's as well relevant, as you mentioned, that we are not only talking about the PhDs, because they are coming into an established environment with expert researchers, and they learn a lot from them. So we should kind of include, for example, the supervisors as well. Okay, but I read a lot of included curricula, so included in the doctoral schools, which is great. I found it very interesting, Helen, you mentioned you come from the open education part. The question is, and we discuss it a lot in our community, that we are focused on the PhD at the first stage, but what about the bachelor and master students? So it's kind of, they do getting a kind of close education at the universities, and then they have PhDs, and we say, so now you're doing open science. What do you think? Is this a problem still that they do not, even talking about the norms and values, that is a big change from the university education to the scientific education as a PhD.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I'm not directly involved in teaching PhD students at the moment, although I am about to become one. So I can address some of these issues a bit more thoroughly once I've been through this a bit more. But I mean, throughout the whole of the education system, I think some of these issues need to be addressed, as I think Maura was saying earlier. And I'd very much like to see these open principles be part of all education, really, in terms of how we do research, whether that is at school level, university level and beyond, and not see it as the only way, but to see it as a way, and to understand the benefits, the pros and cons, and understand the choices. So, for example, I remember once teaching some researchers about Creative Commons licensing, which of course nobody is going to, you start talking about licensing and they're just not interested. But actually when you start explaining it and saying, but what this means to you is that you have control. You have control over what happens to your research. If you have this license, it allows you to do this and others to do that. So it gives people choice. So I think that's what I'd like to see, that the education be integrated within curricula and within courses, so people have an understanding of the choices that they make. And the choice might be not to do open science. It might be another choice, but I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Thank you. Great. Other comments from the audience? Over here.
Hello. Thinking to have a choice. Sometimes maybe I will like to have to make open science, but I don't have the choice. Because if I make open science, maybe I don't make career. So for example, one simple example with in Spain, if you want to have a position at the university, you have to make a control, and you have to bring some quality index. So if I want to make a career, I need some publications. And if I make open science publications, these publications, they are not registered in this high level index, etc. So I don't get credits, I don't have career. So that's the point. Maybe that's one point. The other point is I was thinking about to pick again the topic reusability and reproducibility. So well, I'm training coordinator, by the way. So when I make my materials, I try to make it reusable. So break it in pieces, modules, so different concepts. You can pick this and put together, etc. The point is, when I speak with colleagues, maybe they don't want to make it reusable. And I understand why, because the academic trend is, if you want a grant, if you want to have credits again, it's always you need to make something novel, to make something new. If I reuse things, I'm not the developer and the creator, so I don't have credits. So how you can change this attitude? How you can really make the choice in the reality? No, yes, I would like, but I can't. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that this is probably one of the single most important aspects of creating an open science environment that's usable for early career researchers. And it's why I mentioned in my talk that, I mean, researchers are economic agents, right? Like they need housing and food and whatnot, and it's the unfortunate consequence of the way in which our professional organization exists, is that it is inherently a competitive and individualistic discipline that we're participating in, which runs quite counter to the dispositions of scientists who are collaborative and interested in one another's work. And I keep seeing on the screen that, okay, like supervisors don't know about OS and ECRs do, and this is tension. And I see unfairly a lot of responsibility is put on ECRs who have the least economic and work security in the entire ecosystem of academia. And it said, okay, well, we have these new policies, our grants now have these contingencies, they have to be open science, so on and so forth. Whereas realistically, it should be the exact antithetical situation. I'm very much in favor of sticks to the top, that there are requirements now that you are a PI, you have certain obligations. But yeah, it is a comprehensive cultural change that's needed, and I never, ever, ever fault an ECR who goes the route of publishing closed science because they know that they're entering into a competitive environment. I do much more fault people who have robust career stability who choose to still follow these lines, willingly continuing this sort of system. So I think it's a difficult internal situation if you are someone who's OS oriented, but also recognizes your reality, that you have to participate in activities that might run counter to what you think is correct. But I don't think it's a fault to be blamed on ECRs. I do think that this is where the power of an institution, the powering of a steering body, the powering of a governing agency comes into play. Because the whole movement can't solely be built off of the backs of workers who have no rights and no stability. That's just unethical.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think there are initiatives trying to address this, as many of you will know, around COARA, the Coalition on Reforming Research Assessment, which is trying to move from this declaration of, yes, we agree with this, but towards action. So many institutions and organizations are developing action plans, but that, as you said, that's a long-term thing. I think there's also an issue around this tension between competition and collaboration has been there for a long time, and as I say, it was there in open education as well, and still is. Why do I give my teaching materials away? Because then I'm going to, that other university down the road can have them. So what gives your university the value? And I think that's a question that a lot of institutions need to ask, is that what is it that they're offering that's unique and what can be shared? And certainly in the UK, we're going through a period of huge financial constraints on universities, and we need to be looking at what we can share. JISC is certainly looking at this in terms of an infrastructure respect. We've got a report coming out soon on shared services, but it can go beyond that. Why does every university have a section that does a particular type of training when we could share the resources? But it really does make you question what value are you giving as a unique institution? So I think that's an uncomfortable question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, even in online, I read a lot about we need to kind of get the supervisors to teach them as well. PhD needs opportunities to make choices independently of their supervisors. It is, I guess, it's still a challenging topic because both groups the EOSCs are dependent from the supervisors. Okay, I will close this poll and we come to the third one, and afterwards you can talk about your impression and what your takeaway, so to speak. So, next questions related to the more to Helen's talk are: what good practices, tools, and resources can you recommend for open science trainers? So we heard a lot of it in the talks already. And the second question is: what opportunities are there for collaboration and networking? Do you have any personal experience, or do you have your own regional networks, for example? So there are people typing, but if you like, just raise your hands and tell us about your experience. Okay, yes, there's a statement. Thank you.
Yes, hello, Irena Vipac-Barvara. I'm from Slovene Social Science Data Archives, but I'm also involved in the training that we have for Data Stewards Network now in Slovenia. And I can only add that I'm coming from social sciences, and what we notice now that we are putting together the training that you really need colleagues from different disciplines, because you don't know it all. So I think that's also a huge challenge. You know, I'm in these for basically 30 years, so I know a lot. But when you come to natural sciences, I don't know all the tools, all the processes. So I think that's also something that that we need. So this networking and collaboration, it also means involving colleagues from different disciplines. Just as a note, yeah.
And do you have a specific tip how you get them engaged?
You know them. It's also you met them in different environment, and you work with them together. If you're not 15 years old, you meet them, and but we still notice that you put something together, then you have a lecture, and you see that when the lecture will be repeated, we'll probably need to improve some of the things. And I think that's how these trainings are going. Not only that you need colleagues to review your training activities, but also because some of the things need additional explanations for a certain discipline. And yeah, that's kind of the thing. Yeah, it's impossible to just send out a query who's going to help. I think you need to have internal network in national or international environments to get this done. Otherwise, it's just not. Yeah.
Thank you. So I guess Helen, no, I learned which talk was it? I don't know. But I learned that you can get a kind of certificate for an open science trainer. Is that a kind of incentive we need, that you are to get the people engaged?
I think it's an area that's been identified as another area where there is a lot of duplication. You know, we've got every initiative coming up with their own certification to be a train the trainer. So again, that's one of the areas. Opportunity Area 5 is looking to see whether we can do some kind of coordination around that. But yes, I think certainly if it is an early career researcher that's becoming a trainer, then getting some kind of certification is a useful thing at the end. And a lot of countries and places require that as part of attending any kind of staff development. You need to have some kind of evidence that you've completed that.
Okay, thank you. And there are a lot of
it's great to see all the
sources
resources
mentioned.
there.
Yeah, thank you very much. But it's people saying online that it's of course takes some time to go through these sources and can be very overwhelming to find good ones.
I think for a lot of this, it is overwhelming. So I just really do think community is the answer. So finding a community that can link you to, where you can ask and you can get opinions. And, often some of us are members of multiple communities, so we can provide that bridge between communities. I'm quite a fan of getting out of my comfort zone and going to communities where I can learn from somebody that's coming at the topics from a different angle. And I think that's worth trying.
And I guess, at least from my experience, I think the local communities are very important to get the people involved. So that's a kind of the open science, let's say it's kind of visible in your own context, daily, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not that dissimilar from any other educational approach, right? Like the requirements to be considered for a professorship in the Netherlands is different than Germany, and so on and so forth. And then also, therefore, the open science skills that are associated with the evaluation of whether or not you have the qualifications to be a teacher vary from country to country. So this communication between local pockets of knowledge and then an international, what I consider political movement like open science, is an interesting thing to develop. And it's something that Helen has mentioned a few times already, which is the importance of taking into consideration coherent metadata when you're doing anything. I mean, I've not been highly specific about my approach as to what you should do as an open scientist, but if there's one thing that I think you should do, it's pay attention to the standards that are being developed for coherence on metadata, because it's really for people who are trying to create networks that make finding resources easier, this is probably one of the most consequential things that you as an individual can do so that we don't continue to contribute to just the establishment of more silos that cannot speak to one another and more hidden resources. I can't overstate the value of paying attention to this.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I read as well that universities are starting to establish open science offices, and you can easily call the people locally, and they were happy to help. So these are the strategies to foster open science and training. If there's no statement from the audience, I will close this poll. And we'll use the last minutes to ask Helen and Moa, what do you think are the takeaways? What do you see as relevant, or should we do as a community to foster open science?
I think I'm going to probably just say the key points from my talk, which were around reflecting on your own perspective and where you're coming from, and then trying to find communities and networks that can support you, because open science is so broad, there are so many different facets to it, that we need to be talking to each other and we need to be collaborating.
Yeah, I think what I take away from this session is something that I expected to take away, which is that it's so confusing what open science education is, and when it's open education, and when it's materials, and so on and so forth. And I do really implore everyone to kind of take a moment to pause and figure out, like, what are we doing, right? These are machines that start running and they spiral quickly. So take seriously the responsibility that you have in directing that machine, and think about what it is that we're doing, because we have a room full of experts and no one really can answer what open education is or how we're supposed to do it, and that should at least, if not be worrying, then trigger your own reflections on what it is that we're supposed to be doing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this is as well important what I always hear. So I guess what we can take away, if there's a takeaway, is that open science, or I guess we even shouldn't have an specific open science training definition, because it's so complex. Because what I hear from colleagues from other disciplines are that they, for example, for this fair and data management, they're saying we're doing qualitative research. We cannot use this, and I think that's okay. You have your own definition, and the strategies to do open science.
Could I just add one point, because I meant to mention this? I think it can be overwhelming to think we've got to do open science, but I've seen a few things. I think it came from TU Delft, was talking about the buffet of open science. So it's not necessarily starting with everything. You just pick something small, and I think that's a key point as well. Otherwise, it becomes too much.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen and Maura. Are there any last statements from the audience? It's the last chance. Conference is ending. Yeah, please.
One of the elements, that I notice is that a lot of materials that are online are in English. I think we need to start developing national resources and national terminology, and I would urge developers of the node to add the language filter on the portal, because currently it's not there. No. So I think that's also something that we need to look into, how to actually link national resources to the EOSC portal and to have it visible. Yeah, thanks.
That's great.
Then thank you very much. Thank you again for our panelists. And thank you and the online audience, and see you.